Welcome to the Seahorse Whisperer Society's quick tips and tricks for keeping happy and healthy seahorses. If you're new here, please click that subscribe button, and if you hit the bell, you won't miss any new quick tips and tricks. Today we're going to talk about something near and dear to every seahorse keeper's heart: feeding seahorses successfully. As a seahorse keeper, whether you're brand new or you've been doing this for a long time, you know how important feeding is to seahorses. Today, we're just going to cover the basic ways to feed a seahorse. Those three methods include broadcast feeding, target feeding, and training on a feeder. I turn the filter of the flow down to almost a trickle when I broadcast feed. First, so that the filter does not suck the food up too quickly, and second, so that they don't overexert themselves chasing it. I basically use a fork. You could probably find a better method. I don't put the fork in the tank, but I just drop the food in basically, and it goes flying. With the lower amount of flow, it doesn't fly around too quickly, but the lower flow from the covered spray bar power head makes it move around a bit, looking alive so they can chase it. If you listen closely, you can hear them snicking. The amount of food to put in depends on a ton of different things. How many seahorses there are in the tank, what types of food you feed, how often you feed, your filtration method, your system, just many things. The way that I determine how much to feed is basically by guessing at first and going back after 20 to 30 minutes, cleaning up any leftovers and adjusting, like basically giving a little bit less the next feeding. If there's nothing left, I might try a little more the next time and just play with it until I figure out how much I can put in, and they will eat it all within 20 to 30 minutes. Having a bare bottom system absolutely helps when using the broadcast feeding method, and I've found that seahorses really do enjoy feeding from the water column. In a larger system, I like to use wave makers that have a feed option, so I can literally turn them off for a 10-minute period and then they'll come back on by themselves. That gives the seahorses a chance to eat from the water column without having to turn something off that you might forget to turn back on. The feed time might need to be adjusted so that you make sure you have time to get in there and clean it up, or have a sump with adequate filtration to deal with any food that's sucked down there. Also, that the seahorses get a chance to eat, and be sure to watch it first to make sure that all seahorses are getting food, because some are just piggier than others. Target feeding involves using something like a baster or Julien's thing to aim the food at the fish, is the basic idea. This method is great if you happen to have tank mates in with the seahorses, or if you have a piggy seahorse that eats faster and more than the rest, because you could feed the fish or the piggy seahorses on one side of the tank and then target feed the slower eating seahorses on the other at the same time. You basically give the seahorses a piece of food at a time. This method is great if you have a substrate and don't want to have to hunt down every little piece of food that they might have missed, because you can clean up as you go, and the pieces they don't eat, you can pull immediately from the system. I do not advise trying to target feed brand new seahorses. They need to be trained, and that takes patience and time, and chasing a seahorse around a tank with a baster will just stress them out. Finally, target feeding is great if you have pickier seahorses who eat slower and like to inspect their food. With a couple of my different seahorses, I've noticed that if I throw in a bunch of food at the same time, they almost seem overwhelmed and confused. Whereas if I target feed and give them a piece at a time for them to inspect, they eat it right up. So this is really just about playing with your seahorses and seeing what they like. Many people like to use a bought feeder or a DIY dish to make a seahorse feeding vessel, which keeps the food in a contained area for easy cleanup. However, the seahorses must be trained to eat from the feeding dish, And it's very important to pull and clean every piece of the feeder often to avoid any buildup of organics that could lead to bacterial issues. I often use DIY feeders in my grow out tanks. And I can tell you this, if you use any kind of container, make sure it's not too tall. Once you get a correctly sized feeder and adjust your flow properly, it's pretty easy to train the seahorses to eat from the feeder. If they are already trained to target feed from a turkey baster or Julien's thing, then they will know automatically when they see that it means food. It still might take them a few times to get used to the idea that they have to go to the dish for food. Feeding at the same time every day can help them get into a routine and schedule and get used to the feeder. But the basic idea is to just continue putting food into the feeder and removing it if they don't eat it. And eventually, they will be at the feeder waiting when it's time for dinner. It's always a good idea to return 20 to 30 minutes later, no matter which feeding method you use, and make sure there's no remaining food. In this tank, after 20 to 30 minutes, it looks like they've eaten all the food. Just a note, we will be covering cleaning the glass in the next tips and tricks video. That's why it's still dirty. I'm going to show you how to clean it. Be sure to check under any sponges and in the filters or sump to be sure that food didn't get sucked up too quickly. If you do find some leftover food in the tank, using a turkey baster or an airline siphon, you just want to remove anything that's left over. Not only could the seahorses get sick if they ate that leftover food, but it also adds to the organic level, and we don't want that. Final note, if you have multiple tanks, make sure that you have different basters, airlines, and equipment to avoid cross-contamination. Let's talk about what you do if your brand new captive bred seahorses won't eat. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Tips and Tricks, and we'll see you next time.